Okay.
Welcome everyone, and I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021. First up is the Pledge of Allegiance, and it sounds like Planning Manager Levitan has a flag that he can share.
I do.
And then Yep, I got it. So if everybody can stand, and I will lead you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is a roll call. So for all commissioners in attendance, when I call your name, if you could acknowledge that you're here. Commissioner Welch.
Here.
Commissioner Osland.
Present.
Commissioner Huxford.
Yes.
Commissioner Doer.
Here.
Commissioner Holt.
Here.
And Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Okay, and I'm Commissioner Cronin, and I'm here as well. Next I'd also like to welcome Councilman Ewing, who's in attendance. So thank you for joining us tonight. Next is on to the guest business. So if there's any items not on the agenda, for anyone in the crowd, now's your chance to have the floor. Hearing nothing, we're on to the action items. So the only action item is to approve the minutes from the May 19th, 2021 minutes. If any commissioners, I'll give everybody a chance to take a look at them. And if anybody has any corrections or amendments, please say them now.
Chair Cronin, there's a small edit at the end where you thanked somebody and it should be thanked or something, but it's thank. So just a weird, just being me kind of thing. But thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Huxford. Does anybody else have any other amendments? So hearing nothing, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from May 24th, 2019 with Commissioner Huxford's amendment. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And now we're on to the discussion items. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Senior Planner Place for a briefing on the proposed amendments to the non-conforming code.
Thank you. Good evening. I know it's warm, steamy, and I know before we just got started, we talked about probably trying to go through this rather quickly so that folks can get out and enjoy the nice evening. So you have the packet, you have the attachments. I'm just going to give a briefing tonight on our non-conforming code and proposed amendments to that. So this is the first time that you've seen this. This is just the introduction, and it's really just to give you an overview about why we're proposing amendments to the non-conforming code. First and foremost, the city's non-conforming code has been in place since 2003 was the last time we had major changes to it. And over the last several years, we've noticed, especially with more and more annexations, that there are a number of properties that come in with non-conforming questions, want to do rear yard decks or things in their side yard. And that's specific to the structure, but it's been challenging for both staff and property owners. And so we've decided it's time for an overhaul of this particular section of code. And with this amendment, we hope to address the concerns about streamlining it, trying to simplify it so it follows a little more traditional non-conforming zoning law and terminologies, dovetailing it with our particular non-conforming regulations of our S&P, the Shoreline Master Program, and also consider different zoning approaches to manage the non-conformities. We've had this code in place for a while, and I think it's time for an overhaul and some changes to it. So in zoning, a nonconformity at its most basic is really an existing lot, structure, or use that fails to comply with the existing standards. So at some point in time, a house that was built complied with the standards, and as the city updates its zoning districts and updates its zoning dimensions, uses, those become non-conforming. What's considered, a lot of people use the terminology grandfathered in, which is true. You can basically keep that and continue that use as long as you're not making specific changes to it. So that is at its most basic what non-conforming means. There is a distinction between legal and illegal uses. And in this particular code update, we're really just talking about legal non-conforming uses, as I stated in the staff report. So when we do zoning changes, it can result in an increase of those non-conformities. And a lot of times property owners want to modify, expand, or rebuild their particular structure or put a new use in a building. Say, for example, there is a business within a residential district that is considered like non-conforming use because it may not be allowed in that residential district, but it's been there for a number of years and it's always existed. If they want to come in and do an expansion, or if a fire occurs and it burns more than 50%, which is our threshold in our code right now, that use cannot be rebuilt generally. So our code as it stands right now is has a lot of deference for single family, which means the single family residentials are basically allowed to be rebuilt no matter what in our code. Our SMP does not have the same statutes, and specifically our SMP does not allow enlargement or expansion of uses where our code really does. So that's where we need it to dovetail more. We also need to make the rules clearer. Right now, when you read our municipal code, it's a little bit unclear. I think it's a little ambiguous. And I think through this code amendment, we want to make it simplified, clearer, and change the terminology. So right now in our code, we have a non-conforming lot definition. We have a non-conforming use definition. We have a non-conforming situation. The non-conforming situation is a unique terminology that some communities use. A lot of them just use structure. Our code is really getting to the point of a non-conforming structure, but it doesn't state that. So I think that's one of the changes we'd like to make as we talk about abandonment. So you have a use in place, and if you don't use it or there's nothing there for a time period. Right now, our code is 6 months. The SMP is 12 months. That's the kind of thing we're looking to dovetail those. Should it be 6 months? Should it be longer? So we're going to look for input from you on those particular approaches. And I think in the staff report, I specifically listed out all those approaches for consideration: abandonment, reconstruction, restoration, enlargement, alteration or expansion, termination, amortization. So I want some opinions on all of these variances and takings vested rights. There's a concept of benign versus detrimental non-conforming uses, and I would like some input on those. And then should we possibly make a distinction on non-conforming uses by zoning district? That's also something we can think about as we go through this code amendment. So I provided a few examples on some of the non-conforming questions and situations. There's definitely a lot of specific examples that are unique, but in general, we have noticed annexation, like I'd mentioned earlier, have resulted in non-conforming lots or structures. Some single family homes exist, especially along the 20th Street corridor or in the sub areas where they're still allowed to exist. But when a new business wants to use that home and go in there, let's say a retail establishment wants to use that existing home, it makes it especially difficult for reuse when we start talking about how much parking do you need to add when this new business goes in an existing single family house that used to exist. So we have also made recent changes to the city's zoning code in particular, and I'm sure you recall this, the update to our zoning code last year in which we changed the setbacks from when they were 5 feet on the rear and side to 10 feet. So that has resulted in some recent questions on wanting to construct stuff within those setbacks that changed. And then we definitely have some older properties which create some non-conforming situations and some challenges as well. So for part of this code amendment, I did take a look at and research other jurisdictions and looked at examples of their ordinances. I did attach and sent links in the staff report to specifically Monroe, Everett, Bellingham, Marysville, Seattle, and then Milwaukee, Oregon, that provided different provisions. Some have a certification process, usually like a conditional use permit to if they want to expand a use in the future, and that usually goes to hearing examiner. That's something we could consider putting in our code. We don't have that right now. Right now we have something that's a certification. Although I think in my time at the city, I have yet to see, it really just goes through the building permit process and the change of use process. We don't have a specific form for like a non-conforming use change. So what I'd like tonight is just to provide input from you on these different articles and what you read in the staff report. I'd love to hear specifically on your take on approach. Should we be more restrictive? Should we be more liberal? Or maybe it's a blend of both? What do you think of benign versus the detrimental non-conforming uses? And what is a good time period for abandonment? Should it be 6 months, a year, longer? Or should it be different depending on the particular use? And what do you think about amortization? And that really is allowing a use for a specific amount of time and then it basically sunsets. So laying all that out there, that in a nutshell is the non-conforming use amendments. And I am happy to take any questions that you have or just have some discussion on it at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Planner Place. Yeah, I think I can start off. First, thank you for that. I thought that had a ton of information and links and it was very helpful and easy to read. So thank you for helping us out with that. As far as the code amendment and just the continual code cleanup, I continue to support it. I do think, it's important for the city code and the shoreline management program. They should be consistent. So I think that as we go forward and as we're, obviously changing other aspects to make sure it is all in line and streamlined is obviously, I'm always going to support that aspect of it. One thing, as far as the specifics to like some of the approaches for consideration, I think, a lot of it's dealing obviously with city rights and property owner rights and things like that. So as time goes on and I learn more and see what the city is thinking, I think I'll be able to firm up my opinions on those. But I did make some specific notes to those. So I'll go over those, for you, just so you have my input on that. I think for the abandonment, I definitely support that. I do think that, having a significant length or a longer length of time than some of the cities that I saw in there is important though. I do see, like I saw Marysville had 24 months for, I think it was for a structure, then for non-conforming land being 12. I look at it, like I said, as far as the property rights and the city vision, there's those trade-offs, but then I think with some of these, there's, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but from a legal standpoint, I could see the city getting in a lot of situations as far as with reconstruction. If a natural disaster happened, I saw, it said in one of the things you provided, that a lot of the things can be hard to enforce. So I think for reconstruction, I would support a higher rebuild cost. Just, in that particular one, I'd lean, probably on the property owner's rights. But then as far as, let's see, I think enlargement, alteration, and expansion, I think that's a good way for the city to control non-conforming issues. Obviously, if there was a building that was non-conforming and they wanted to add a second story or something like that, that would not only make it more non-conforming, but more detrimental to the city, I'd want the city to be able to have controls over that. Amortization is another thing I see issues with, just as far as, it talked about, they can be controversial just because, not only do they put sunsets on properties, that can affect property values, so there might be litigation there. But then I also see, it talks about how, then you can also have a business in there that sunsets, and then, what comes next. You don't know necessarily what does come next. And there's tons of businesses that could easily go in there, but is that something you want to do if just because if it's non-conforming? Let's see. Takings, I think I need to see more on that. I didn't read enough to specifically comment on that. And then lastly, I think as far as the benign versus detrimental, I think that that really made sense to me. If there's a way to separate the definitions of benign nonconformities and the detrimental nonconformities, I think that'd be a good way to continually, continue the code cleanup. And, as long as there's not ways for, maybe ones that are detrimental to get labeled as benign and slip through the process, I think that'd be a really easy way to, to clean up some of the things without, then having the larger issues, get more under a magnifying glass. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just to, I think you had a comment about supporting the higher rebuild costs. So do you mean percentage? So right now we have a 50%. Are you thinking a higher percentage or?
So, well, and you said something earlier where maybe I actually misinterpreted that. Is that if 50% of the structure is destroyed, or if is that the rebuild? Because I heard you talk earlier, if a fire, destroys more than 50% of the value of a building, then it can't be rebuilt. Am I talking about the same code where, because I think of rebuild costs in construction. I saw that Marysville had a 75% rebuild cost, but in reading their code, I thought it was more related to how much it costs to rebuild the structure, which I guess is the same. I think actually what we're talking about might be the same. Yeah. So I think I would support a higher rebuild cost, just so if somebody did, own a building, natural disaster happens just because they can't build it. Because if you think about, obviously, it's good correlation, so home values are worth more, but with how much construction costs right now, you could really handcuff someone that didn't deserve it. But again, I'm just thinking kind of outside the box on specific examples, trying to give you information to work off of. So
okay. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's exactly what I was wanting, just to clarify what you meant by that. And it is 50%, I think, of it's either assessed value or the market value. It's the valuation when they bring it into like the building permit and they put the valuation on there. So I have to double check in our code. I want to say assessed value, but that might not be, it might be market value. Let me double check. Okay, thank you for that.
I would guess it's probably assessed value, because that's what Marysville's is 75% of assessed value.
That's what I was thinking too. I was just going to pull it up, but I just looked at that earlier.
Yeah, and that's my mistake too. So I was talking about rebuild costs. So I just had that incorrect. I'd have to think about what I support as far as the appraised value on the 50%.
It is appraised value. Now that I'm double checking it in the code. Yep, that's okay. All right, thank you for your input. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have any comments?
Linda, can you hear me?
Yes.
What's the timeline on this? Melissa, what's the timeline?
I think generally this was slated for the third quarter of this year. So I think we're introducing it this summer. If we can have it wrapped up by early to mid fall, that would be ideal. So okay. Back to you probably in July with a little bit more information, maybe some draft code, either July or August, depending on the meetings. And then, going through it a little bit more, possibly holding a hearing beginning of the fall and then moving to council later. That's what I'm anticipating.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was kind of curious. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I'd have to say I kind of agree a lot with what John was saying. I do like, after looking at Marysville's numbers, I like theirs as our more of a guideline when it comes to the 25% for repairs and maintained, and 75% when it's accidental or destroyed by some other issue that happens. I also want to get the benign and lost my wording here in front of me. Sorry, lost my notes. Benign and detrimental. That's going to be important, especially with as with these new annexed areas, to make sure we're not in more environmental concerns. I guess I'm worried about there. So.
Thank you very much for that too. I appreciate that. And I think if everyone had read and has read the information, so benign really is, yeah, you've got a setback and it doesn't meet it anymore. Detrimental being, you've got an industrial use that wants to expand, and there lies the big difference of it may have pollution or something like that. So looking at each of those when those uses want to expand is, the benign ones really aren't going to harm anyone where the detrimental possibly could. And then we would make a distinction between that and the code. Thank you.
I had a quick question about a note in the staff report that you discussed the distinction between an expansion of non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures. And I'm wondering where you and the rest of the staff are leaning on that, whether that's breaking that out in the code as two separate situations is sort of the path that we're headed down, or keeping it all as one in one bucket.
Great question. I do think that we would break it out into two sections. I think it makes sense because a structure and the use are very different. So it would make sense to not lump them together, where right now I do think they might be in that under the non-conforming situation. I do think an expansion of a non-conforming structure might be less of a concern than non-conforming use. It really depends on the situation. But if that's some of the feedback you want to staff to take a look at, I think that we would separate those out if that's the commission's desire.
That would be my preference on that one.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that.
If I may, this is Janice, and I have a couple different comments. I'm so proud, by the way, of our commission and how we do our homework. Great comments tonight so far. John Cronin, you must have been up all night. That was an amazing assessment. I agree with Commissioner Davis's comment of a moment ago, please. I agree with Commissioner Chair Cronin's assessment of timing. 6 months, I think, is too shy. 2 years is too long. There are some things in the middle that can happen when it comes to construction, certainly when it comes to properties that are already perhaps at risk for either gaining or losing conformity. Couple different questions though. We have annexed in properties recently, and many of those properties, and you talk about grandfathering here a lot, but many of those properties have the ability to do something because of wetlands, because of existing structures, because of usage, and they are never going to be conforming. They're never going to be conforming. And my concern is that we're trying to put square pegs in a round hole. So there's always going to be that need for a little bit of ambiguity. As much as I like conformity, there's going to be a little bit of that need, especially when it comes to anything having to do with wetlands in our area, stormwater being an issue, waterfront being an issue, and the fact that a lot of these people are already dancing with Snohomish County. And so that parlaying into what the city is putting into code, relatively quickly, soon after people may or may not even know that they have been annexed in, might be a harsh reality. So I would ask for some sort of leniency, some sort of, and I think it's in the annexation wording, that there's a period of time that that they're honoring where you've been, that they're honoring where you are, and then you become the city after you become the city. I'm wording that poorly, but I think you all get what I said. I said what I meant. I think that there's a place there where, especially with some of these properties that are just now entering into the city, might be allowed an additional nuance. Those were my only comments, other than the ones that have already been voiced by the rest of the commission. And I thank you for your time.
Commissioner Huxford, I'm happy to respond to that. So yeah, in general, vested rights, especially as it relates to permitted uses, they survive annexation. So post-annexation for things like, one of the issues that has come up with the Southeast Interlocal annexation has been people that, especially out towards 123rd, that have farm animals that, that don't meet the minimum lot size that the city has to keep farm animals. And so post-annexation, that would be a vested right that they would be able to continue in perpetuity as long as they continue that use. So that has more to do on the use side. As it relates to development standards, whether it's either building or things like wetlands, there's typically a certain amount of time where they're vested, depending on if they've gotten a recent building permit or if they had a preliminary subdivision approved in the county. The RCWs and the WACs define a certain amount of time where they're vested to the regulations in place. So there definitely is some language related to that. And some of our kind of permissible use work that's kind of expanded into some edits to the supplementary use regulations to things like farm animals. We're trying to clarify that so people that have recently annexed know that they can continue on with these uses post annexation if they've been legally entitled under the county.
Okay. I look forward to absorbing that and for future comment. I think that there's more land use issues than farm animal issues, if I'm reading this correctly. And land use comes into more wetlands, shoreline, transport, infrastructure, whatever else is going on with some of these areas. And I'm curious to see where that will lead us. We've got a lot of status conversation coming up, and I'll be curious to see how these two marry. So I appreciate though your clarification. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely it applies on the land use side of things. So if someone had built something along the lake and the county was subject to the county's shoreline master program, built it to those standards, then when it comes to it becoming a non-conforming use, we would be evaluating that based on the county SMP and the county code that was in place at the time. And then that's where we need to it's kind of a nuanced discussion and where we need to be referring back to county code and kind of reconciling that with our city standards. So post annexation, it does get a little bit tricky, but we'll make sure that we can kind of clarify that and simplify that as much as possible through this process.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Again, ADUs, I mean, we can go on and on, right? There's all these different things that are happening that are going to be, I love it be cut and dried in just one thing, but there's some nuances that are going to be interesting as we move forward with this. I appreciate it though. Thank you.
Thank you all for that discussion. I'd also like to, I see Councilman Peter Shagan, so I'd like to welcome him. In his presence, thank you for joining. And Commissioner Doer, I noticed you had a comment prior to that discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to, add, I'm in agreement with, the statements of the other commissioners, particularly the summary that Commission Chair Cronin put together. I think one of the things that I'm most concerned about, if I'm reading this correctly, is kind of how an amortization might work. People who have a vested property right, if it's a non-harm causing but still non-conforming piece of property, I'd like to see what the proposals look like for how that would be handled. But I do have some bit of a moral problem, basically putting a time limit on somebody's property right, saying, well, it was okay when it was with the county, it's not okay with the city, and now you have 10 years to either fix it or your property is no longer in compliance. So I think that's just something I'd like to see addressed strongly.
Great. Thank you for those comments. Appreciate it.
I think I'd like to echo what Commissioner Durr was saying. I think with the property rights, as long as it's a benign issue, having a time frame is probably not as good as if it were something that's actually going to be damaging something. So I would kind of like going Mike's idea of less issue with a time, as long as it's a benign issue.
Thank you all for that. And Commissioner Osland, do you have any 2 cents on any of the presentation?
Yeah, I appreciate all the extra materials that were provided. That was helpful. I'm in alignment with Commissioner Dewar about not expiring people's land rights unless there's some good reason to do so. I would be, when we look at that closely, I agree, we really need to look at that language. Also, what is benign and what is harmful, and really think about what that is. So I'll be interested to see more of that, but I'm in line with most of the commissioners from what we've seen so far.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you, Senior Planner Place. Unless you have any other comments for the commission, we can move on to the next discussion item.
I don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'm going to pass it on to Planning Manager Levitan for the briefing on the comp plan for the parks and capital facilities elements.
All right, thank you, Chair Cronin. So yeah, this is going to be a really brief discussion. So as you'll remember, back in January, the annual docket to update the comprehensive plan, which we can do once per year, the Planning Commission made a recommendation to City Council on that docket. And the City Council subsequently by resolution adopted the 2021 comprehensive plan docket. As it was last year, the scope of the proposed amendments this year are pretty limited, kind of general housekeeping items to make sure that our capital facilities and our parks facilities, our city boundaries, things along those lines are kept up to date. As noted in the staff report, the city is required to do a more extensive update called a periodic update. We are not required to complete that until June of 2024. So we would imagine over the next few years, in addition to some of the special items that we've identified, like the updates to the Shoreline Master Program, some of the sub-area planning related to infrastructure analysis within our industrial areas, really beyond those kind of special items where the cities identified a need for additional analysis and additional policy development. Really, we see the next couple comp plan dockets staying relatively limited in scope. So as it pertains to this year, we wanted to just take the opportunity at one meeting per month just to kind of walk through some of the items that have been identified for the various elements or chapters of the comp plan. We have before you tonight just proposed an outline of the proposed amendments to the capital facilities chapter and also the parks, recreation, and open space. There's a lot of overlap, especially as it relates to parks, capital facilities. So we figured we'd bring these together. So the staff report basically provides just kind of a high level summary. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's generally related to just the capital facilities, whether they're parks, whether they're transportation, whether there are other city facilities, keeping those up to date, keeping the corresponding maps and figures up to date, accounting for recent annexations. So really, we just wanted to provide this to the Planning Commission tonight. If any of you had an opportunity to look through the two elements, the two chapters of the comp plan, if there are any additional items that you think the city really should be tackling or addressing through the annual docket, we'd be happy to look at that before we come back for public hearings, likely in early fall of 2021, before the Planning Commission, before you make your recommendation to the City Council. So yeah, I didn't have any particular items that I felt really needed to be explained in extreme detail, but happy to listen to any feedback.
Thank you for that. Do any commissioners have any comments on what Planning Manager Levitan said?
I have one quick question that might be out of your scope, and if it is, I apologize, but I've been asked by community members whether or not those Parks Board meetings are posted online, as are all of our meetings. Evidently, they're not able to Zoom in during the meeting if they're even announced, and they haven't been able to follow up on what's being discussed during those meetings. Is that something that you can brief us on or brief others on?
Yeah, I have not been so much involved with the Parks Board. I'm happy to check in on that. I don't think it would be hard. I believe that those are streamed on YouTube as well, or are they not? I thought that they were.
They're supposed to be, we just got told maybe 2 months ago to upload our meetings onto YouTube. So we've been doing that. I thought the parks had been, but we can certainly, Teresa runs that board, so I could check with her. I don't think you can talk during a Zoom live. You're just listening to it.
That would be ideal. Just, it's something that has come up in my conversations around town, and I wanted to make sure that I asked when the time was right. So thank you so much. That would be very helpful.
Mhm.
I'm looking, I can see right now that at least the last 2 meetings are on YouTube right now. You can see them on the YouTube channel for the city.
So some of the decisions that have been made prior to those last 2 meetings, though, are coming up for discussion or in construction. And the concern being that there were people that have property aligning to have not been able to be a part of any of that discussion. So I'm bringing it up simply on this meeting to ask city staff, and I appreciate their comments, but I will forward that back whenever I hear discussion on this that is now in the last 2 meetings available for the public.
Yeah, we can definitely check with Teresa on that and make sure it's as transparent and easily accessible in the future. We will be bringing the parks element to the Parks Board as we do annually. So we'll make sure that we want to have that available and that discussion available for people to watch, including commissioners.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have any questions? Yeah, Planning Manager Levitan, from my point of view, nothing I saw in it, stood out to me. I think, I think it's good to update it. And I also think it's good to be ready, if it is complying with potential grants in the future or anything like that, again, it's along the code cleanup and updating process that I support. So I wish I had something more fruitful for you, but nicely done.
Yeah, no, and especially on the capital facilities, it's largely confined to the 6-year and 20-year capital plans, which we're required to update outside of the comp plan anyway, and that the comp plan needs to be consistent with. And those were just recently reviewed by the city council and submitted to the state. So that's pretty straightforward. And then related to parks, I think as we continue to assess our parks and recreation needs within some of the newly annexed areas, that could result in some additional changes in future years. And any kind of parks planning efforts would then be incorporated into the comp plan.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have any questions for Senior Planning Manager Levitan? All right, I think with that, Planning Manager Levitan, are you okay with, do you need any other information or do you have any questions of the commissioners?
No, I think we'll plan on bringing back, discussing, what did we have for the next one? The Public Services and Utilities chapter, probably at your July 7th meeting, just to continue the trend of having one per month. We'll see if there's an additional item, additional element that we can squeeze into that meeting as well. But no, we'll continue to move forward kind of with the proposed scope that's already been identified. So I appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. So that's the end of the discussion items. Now on to commissioner reports. I will start. I do not have a report. Commissioner Welch.
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Osland.
No report.
Commissioner Doer.
No report.
Commissioner Davis.
I just wanted to say thanks so much to the staff for tonight. Having the links to other jurisdictions was really helpful. That was such a well assembled production. So thank you very much. We appreciate the work that you guys do all the time. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Holt.
Yeah, I actually have 2 things. When do you think we might have in-person meetings again? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I heard that Lake Stevens was at 69% vaccinated. And there's a lot of people who don't know how to Zoom in And I kind of miss being in person and having people to be able to come to our meetings, and then you can kind of see their reaction, and people could do public testimony and so on and so forth. So is there a game plan with the city of when we would be meeting in person again, or is that still kind of up in the air?
Yeah, so Russ would probably have more information on that. I can tell you that for next week's city council meeting, staff and the council will be meeting in person. I believe it will not be open to the public, but I think this is kind of the transition back into in-person meetings to kind of work it out. And I think we're looking at in the future trying to have some sort of hybrid model, because there definitely have been people that have benefited from the ability to provide public testimony and things like that via Zoom. And, you know, technologically, you know, and equipment wise, how we would kind of, those two things would mesh together, where people would be able to come and provide testimony in public while others would be able to do it via Zoom. So I think that's all being explored right now. But the first city council meeting where the council is being afforded the opportunity and staff will also be there is next Tuesday. And then I believe that the directors and Jean and others in the council will be having additional discussions on kind of what that transition continues to look like.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks for that update. And then the second thing is that I think it was 2 meetings ago, I brought up the fact that people are not driving very safely on 117th, 116th, and on Cedar Street because we don't have any sidewalks. And as of now, today, I've almost been hit 4 times walking down those streets. And I started thinking that sidewalks are super expensive, but is there a possibility that maybe we could put in some speed bumps or add some additional speed signs, or do one of those speed signs where it tells the driver how fast they're going? I don't know. They're kind of all around the high school there, right? So it's just my thinking is, it would be nice for it to be safe if kids are walking to school. You know, now school is almost over, but next year, hopefully we'll be back. And it's just not good. And like I said, I understand that sidewalks are very expensive, but speed bumps, maybe not so much. And that would be something you guys could consider. That's all. That was it.
Yeah, and we can definitely forward that on. You know, the police department. The police department in concert with the public works department would be able to evaluate kind of those traffic control devices, including speed bumps. As far as, you know, it kind of depends based on the classification of the street and other variables, but that's something we could definitely look at and kind of relay that information on.
Well, that would be great, because I mean, if it just says, you know, radar, and if you don't slow down, but then what happens is that there's really no radar down there. But I mean, the police department could be making a lot of money because there's so many people that are not doing the speed limit. And that if people realize that they have to do the speed limit, maybe they'd slow down, because my fear is somebody getting hit. So, but thank you.
Commissioner Oxford.
Yes, briefly, 2 things. We have a meeting coming up next Tuesday that Planning Manager Leviton just alluded to, that is the City Council vote on what I thought was a very, very good compromise from our last Planning Commission meeting. So I commend the commissioners, specifically Commissioner Welch, in coming up with a compromise that I think is very workable and certainly reasonable for our city, but that also embraces what was happening before all of this happened in the past 6 months. We have spent 6 months on this, people, and I will, for one, be sitting in on that meeting to make sure that I see who is voting and how they are voting and what the dialogue is surrounding that vote. So thank you very much for your hard work. Again, I appreciate so much serving on this commission with you. The second is my yearly, I was asked to be the Mistress of Ceremonies for the Miss Aquafest pageant. We are not having Aquafest, but there is a Aquafest pageant, simply because these young women devote their time throughout the year to provide service throughout the county. We have crowned is the right word, sorry, different genre, crowned a new Miss Aquafest. Her name is Ocean Chapman. She is out of Granite Falls. She is lovely. She has a hope to be in the Peace Corps. She has been a part of the program on and off for years now and is dedicated to providing community service throughout Snohomish County through the next year where she is queen. So I hope that you will be able to meet her someday somewhere on some street. And I will just let you know that these people signed up for the program, regardless of crowns, regardless of party gowns. These are the people that really want to use this as a stepping stone for their future. So please reach out if you see any of the royalty on the street. That's all I have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Huxford. I actually did have one small report. In conjunction with the school remodel, we are back to remodeling the batting cage at Lake Stevens High School. So if anybody would like to get involved, or more, if anybody would like any more information on how to get involved with that, feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I think we're on to the planning manager's report. Do we have one of those?
Yeah, so I can just give a couple of updates before we sign off. So yeah, your next meeting on June 16th, we have a public hearing for the lot status code amendments. So Sabrina will be providing that. We also plan to bring back kind of a final work session on the permissible uses to kind of give you an update on what we've been working on updating the table and streamlining some of the use regulations. Before that would come back before you, likely on July 21st for a public hearing. And then later, following the council's summer break, it would come back before them, likely in late August at their second August meeting. Okay. We also have a couple of items. We went over the long range work program last week, so a couple other items that will be coming up in the next few meetings include some additional analysis of the Shoreline Master Program updates. And then also we're going to need to amend our impact fees. So that's a code amendment to reflect not just the Southeast Interlocal and the Machias Industrial Annexation, but actually it hasn't been amended since the Redora annexation or some of the other 2018, 2019 annexations. So that will be coming before you on amendments to the traffic impact fees and the parks impact fees, mostly limited to kind of some geographical updates and then some other minor updates to those sections. Then I would also note that there's another 12 minutes of the first farmers market, if you could sprint on over there. But today was the first one. I talked to Dawn, our event and marketing specialist. She said it was going really well as of about 5 o'clock. So yeah, look forward to farmers market throughout the summer. That's what I got.
Thank you. And was that also the future agenda items? That was everything, right?
Yeah, so those were some of the future agenda items as well.
Very good.
I had a quick question for David before we climbed out. Since you talked about the new annexed area, is it a code change that adds the traffication impact to whatever zone in the city, or is that just something administratively to the city? So we know what zone that goes into.
Yeah, so we need to decide and finalize which zones they're going to be in. And right now there's 3 traffic impact zones, or TIZs. And so there's kind of 1, which is the northeast part of the city, 2, which is kind of the western northwest, and then 3, which is the south and southwestern. So discussing that with Public Works as far as what that looks like. Do we just kind of stretch zone 3 to the east and zone 1 a little bit down? We need to look at, where likely traffic from future development is going to go and which zone they should be in. So those are some of the items that we need to address through that project.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. And before we go, do any other commissioners have any questions for Planning Manager Levitan?
So it's my understanding that we're going to go 2 meetings throughout the summer.
So we've identified at least the next two meetings, so the second meeting in June and then also the first meeting in July, but we can look at, especially, we can look at trying to condense and limit it to one meeting in July and August.
That's always been the norm, and I would support, we've had a pretty, for
Yeah.
volunteers, we've been on every other week with you. And so as much as I love doing this, I would ask that perhaps we condense and be appreciative of everybody's volunteer time over the summer months.
Yeah, no, we understand that on the staff side of things. We've already noticed for the June 16th public hearing, but we can at that maybe discuss, if we're going to have just one in July, should it be that July 7th, or would it be the second meeting if there's a preference from commissioners if we do go that route? But we can definitely try to condense the meetings into one.
Thank you. And do any other commissioners have any other comments? All right, hearing nothing, that concludes the Planning Commission meeting for June 2nd, 2021. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the weather.
Thank
Aye.
you. Good night.
Thank you.